episodes 1 and 2 of this series, we learned how to make recordings using Universal Audio's Apollo interfaces in tandem with Unison technology and UAD-powered plugins. Through episodes 3, 4 and 5, we continued our exploration of UAD's best-in-class effects, working on individual sounds and groups of sounds within our mix. In this final film, it's time to turn to UAD-powered plugins one more time to see how these can be used when mastering. At the mastering stage, there are a number of things to consider, all of which will have implications for which tools we reach for. It's likely that you're going to want to use a loudness maximizer at the end of your chain, but there's way more to mastering than simply adding volume. We need to think as well about tone, using EQ. We need to think about compression, whether that means stereo compression or multiband compression. And we might also consider other things such as stereo width of the mix and what that might mean as it translates to the mastering stage. Fortunately, for users of UAD-powered plugins, all of these tools are available to us within UAD's effects range. Most mastering engineers reach for the same tools time and again, their favourite EQ feeding their favourite compressor, and so on. And we're going to start our project by putting a similar chain together, working from the top down. We're going to start with the officially endorsed Manley Massive Passive, an EQ capable of both surgical and more general tone change. For compression, it'll be nice to have two separate options. If we decide that stereo compression will suit our track, we're going to use the UAD Precision Bus Compressor. However, it'll be nice to compare that against a multi-band equivalent, and for that, here is the Precision Multiband. Next, we're going to move on to considerations of stereo width, and again, the Precision range can come to our aid. This time the K-Stereo plugin, which has been developed in partnership with mastering legend Bob Katz. Then we're going to start considering matters of output level, and for that we have the UAD Precision Maximizer. We might even decide that a brick wall limiter on the end is an even better way to inflate levels, in which case we might also use the UAD Oxford limiter. Now we've got a chain set up, let's start working with each of these plugins in turn. Your mastering workflow needs to be fluid, because one processor within your chain will have implications for the sound of another. For instance, you might set up a great stereo compression treatment, which doesn't feel quite so great when you then introduce loudness maximizing. Equally, you might work with an EQ tool, only to discover that its settings need to be different when you introduce stereo widening. Having bypassed the other processors, we're starting with the UAD Precision Stereo Bus Compressor. We're going to run the track and start configuring settings. We're going to use a ratio of 2:1, the lowest possible setting, and we're looking only to catch peaks, so we'll be dialing back the threshold just to ensure that the loudest sections are the only ones being compressed. We'll also be looking to tweak attack and release times to make sure we get a nice natural sounding result. And if there's any headroom left over, we can add a little bit of extra volume using the output level. Let's do that now. Next, let's introduce the Precision Maximizer, which is here towards the end of our chain. On the left, we have a chance to increase input gain level, which we don't need to do because we've controlled that from the output stage of the compressor. Over on the right-hand side, the output dial caps the maximum volume the signal can reach. So we're going to leave that here at -1/10 of a decibel. The mix dial allows us to set up parallel treatments if we want, so that not the whole signal is affected. But we want to keep this at 100% because we want the maximizer to work completely. That just leaves the shape dial, and this introduces increased volume. So as we dial in more level here, we should hear the volume rise. We want some boost, but as we haven't yet finished introducing all of our mastering processes, we don't want to race to maximum volume at this stage. We may come back and tweak this setting later. Interestingly, compressors and loudness maximizers don't only affect dynamics, they have implications for tone too. As a result, it's well worth having an EQ in your chain to compensate for any changes required as far as tone is concerned. The Manley Massive Passive EQ is a great choice as it allows for incredible precision as well as broad-ranging changes to tone. It works like this. We have 4 separate bands, each of which can either be boosted or cut. Each band can also either have a shelf or a bell-style curve, whilst whether you choose to boost or cut, the amount of that is controlled by this dial here. Right down at the bottom we can choose the frequency for each band, and on this dial here we have a chance to choose its band width, how wide the group of frequencies will be that this band is working on. With these various parameters in mind, let's start setting up some changes for our master. We've set up 3 separate bands, a shelf at the top just to add a little air to the signal, a low mid-range band which is just getting rid of some of the additional bite and aggression we don't really need, and almost a high-pass filter by scooping out just the lowest frequencies a little bit. We might experiment with this a little bit more later once we've added some extra processors. Let's experiment with stereo width within our master using the K-Stereo plugin. This gives us a chance to cut or boost volume both for the mid-mono compatible portion of the signal and the area of the signal which is a portion to the sides. This gives us a chance to increase stereo width, but we don't want to go too far because an overwide master is rarely desirable. Let's have a listen to how these dials work. So you can hear that that's making a big difference with a lot of colour added to the sides. Above that, we can switch in the ambience recovery mode. And what this gives us a chance to do is to enhance both the depth and the width of the signal as well, the ambient portion of the signal as the K-Stereo plugin sees it. So again, let's have a listen to that in action. You can really hear there that depending on how we work with ambience, we can either add a lot of extra colour or increased clarity. We can go further as well by switching in the ambience filters, which give us a chance to bring a low and high shelf portion to attenuate the way that ambience is detected, and we've got a mid band here as well. Before we make final mix tweaks and get ready to print our master file, let's experiment with multiband compression. So our master's really taking shape now, but before we get to final tweaks, what we're going to do is to experiment by taking out our stereo compressor and replacing it with the precision multiband compressor instead. What multiband compressors allow you to do is to set up different dynamic responses to different parts of the frequency spectrum. So rather than having a compressor that's working equally from bass all the way through to treble, we can make specific settings in lots of different frequency bands. The precision multiband compressor allows us to set up 5 separate bands which are accessible from these buttons here. So we have a low band all the way through to the top with mid bands in between. And you can see that as I click on each of these bands, its settings are shown over here on the left hand side. On the right, we have a chance to decide whether or not we want to engage each of these bands, or we can indeed switch one off if we don't want it. And we can also solo each band so that we can hear just each frequency group and how it's responding dynamically in turn. So let's start with the low band. We're going to set threshold fairly low down here, and we're going to set ratio around 2 to 1, somewhere there. And we're going to find, if we solo this band, we're going to hear a lot of sub bass, but we're also going to see that the attack and release dials can make a significant difference to the way that this band responds. So you can hear the difference that's making, but you can also see it over here on the right hand side. We have gain reduction amounts showing, and obviously if we're losing level as a result of setting up a dynamic processor to work on this particular frequency band, we can boost level for that band here to make up for any lost signal. So now let's work through some of the other bands and see how multiband compression can help our master. Let's work on this mid-range band now. So we're using some fairly extreme settings there, but that's helping us to hear how these individual bands can interact. And of course we could carry on going through the high mid-frequency band and the high frequency band in turn to make individual settings there as well. Be really careful with multiband compression. It's possible to really undo your master and to have each portion feel like it's working not together anymore but independently. So it's definitely worth, in particular, making sure that the ratio setting isn't too high in any particular band to ensure that settings don't become too extreme. So we've tweaked the multiband compressor a little more just to make sure that every frequency band is working nicely in the master. And now, finally, it's time to add our brick wall limiter, just to take volume up a few more gears. When we're happy with the sound of our whole chain, we're ready to print the master file of our track. In each episode of this series, we've seen how the combination of Universal Audio's Apollo interface and UAD-powered plugins can be used throughout the production process. We made vocal and guitar recordings, and then we moved on to add individual treatments to sounds and groups of sounds through the mixing stage. In this film, we've seen how to add UAD-powered plugins to the mastering stage. Thanks for watching.